he was asked about scheduling with all of these tournaments going on and what is participation in all these tournaments going to look like with the Club World Cup coming up and US Open Cup and Leagues Cup and MLS regular season and CONCACAF Champions Cup. It's just like this endless list of different competitions that is coming up in 2025. And one thing that he did mention, and I think you'll probably touch on this with more detail, is he said there would be more teams participating in the US Open Cup this upcoming season. So doesn't sound like they're going back to all teams being included, but he said more teams would be participating in it. I don't know if that means second teams. I don't know if that means first teams. I don't know if that's the freedom of their choice, but we'll see what that means. I would assume that means first teams if he's referring to it, but at least that, for it's some momentum going back to all teams participating again. But for those hoping that it would be right back to normal again next season, doesn't sound like that's going to be the case.
Yeah, the way we took it and we were kind of conversing about it was they're going to put more first teams in. They There was no mention about how it affects MLS Next Pro, which I thought was interesting because that was a big sticking point last year. We're pulling them out because we want the cup to be used for our development teams so that they can get more experience in real games, right? No mention on how that'll change. My part of me believes that this might have been the US Open Cup committee bending a little bit to say, okay, bring your first teams back, help us with the promotion of it or whatever, and we'll let you keep your second teams in. Now, that's just my gut feeling. That's not a hot take or a scoop. I'm not breaking any news here. Um, I was hoping that, and I don't think you mentioned it yet, or maybe it hasn't come up yet about Leagues Cup, that they are talking about a change in the Leagues Cup schedule and how that's supposed to look.
I didn't
But
mention it yet, but go
okay,
ahead.
my hope was that with that change, it was going to lead to a full reinstation of teams in the Open Cup. Now it sounds like that's not going to be the case. We have to wait at least another year for that, but having more teams in there than last year is a step in the right direction. It's not the end all be all. It is not where we should be content with keeping it. We should have them all back in there. We've had this conversation multiple times, but that is a better that's a better scenario than it was last year. So happy with it, but I do feel like we're still just missing out.
I think it makes sense to not have everybody back next year, because you have teams like Inter Miami who, if you're making them play in the US Open Cup, is now playing like a bajillion games next season because they have US Open
Mhm.
Cup, Leagues Cup, CONCACAF Champions Cup, Club World Cup, MLS, and then MLS play. Well, maybe MLS playoffs, but like that's as much as I talk about before, like in the past, how the MLS schedule with two cups can be comparable to Europe. That's just, like I get that it's still somewhat comparable to Europe because there are European teams who are doing similar competition loads. It's not comparable when you consider the fact that MLS is capped on how much they can spend on depth in bringing in players versus Europe where you can do a Chelsea and have 100 players on your roster.
Mhm.
Um, I don't really know what the right way to go about it is. I mean, he said that teams will be participating in at least one tournament out of that very long list of different competitions that are going on. So I would assume that was going to be the case, considering all of them are probably going to be forced to at least still be in Leagues Cup. He also mentioned wanting more MLS and Liga MX matches. So I assume I took that to mean everybody's participating in Leagues Cup. That's not going to be like a US Open Cup kind of situation where some teams will participate and some won't. Could have been a good opportunity, in my opinion, to because I think two teams every year get a bye because there's not an even number of team or like even number of teams to do groups.
Mhm.
Could have been a good situation to kind of take a couple teams out, like Seattle and Inter Miami, for example, if they're doing the Club World Cup and everybody can participate in the group stages, but teach their own.
If you don't mind me jumping in there, I'm gonna try and find it, and maybe we pigeonhole this into um your notes here, but It sounds like, and I'm going to try and find the person who broke the news so I can give them proper credit, but it sounds like Leagues Cup is looking at a version that includes 18 teams from MLS and 18 teams from Liga MX. It was Lizzie Becherano. I have no idea if I broke that properly, um, or pronounced that properly. Sorry. Leagues Cup is considering a format. This was on December 5th. Leagues Cup is considering a format that only sees 18 MLS teams participate in the upcoming edition. 2025 iteration would go 18 MLS versus 18 Liga MX, which I think is the number of Liga MX anyway.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
sure.
So it would break that. Now, there were some thoughts that that meant the playoff teams, which I think would be backwards because then you would throw them in playoffs, Leagues Cup,
Yeah.
maybe Open Cup. There's a whole bunch of different things, but because it was 9 and 9 on each side, it was going to be the top nine from each conference go. I'll hear your thoughts on that. I don't know.
I don't even like I can't even begin to think about how they're gonna make that one work. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. It's just the league complicating things again. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think putting the playoff teams in as the nine from each conference is totally backwards. If you're trying to take teams out because of congestion and
Hmm.
scheduling, like okay, you're gonna play more games in MLS Cup playoffs, and then you're gonna play more games in the Leagues Cup. And I mean, at what point are we just like it like totally defeats the purpose of taking teams out? So obviously you can't do nine teams in each conference missing the playoffs. There's gonna be some overlap in teams playing in the playoffs and teams playing in Leagues Cup. I have no idea what they're going to do. Maybe some teams that make the playoffs go do Leagues Cup, and some teams that make the playoffs do the US Open Cup. I don't know if it's going to be a choice thing or if it's just going to be like you have been nominated to participate in the US Open Cup this year, or you've been nominated to play in Leagues Cup this year.
Yeah,
I'll be interested
could
to
it
see
be
what
the
they say.
top? Yeah, could it be the top, nine of each conference are in Leagues Cup, and then the bottom six from each conference are in US Open Cup, so that brings it up to 12, so you get more teams than last year. That could be one way to do it, right?
Yeah, could
Um,
be.
and again, eventually they need to work to a place where they can expand their rosters and play in both, right?
Hmm.
My honest guess is that they will eventually just scrap one of them, whether it be Open Cup or Leagues Cup. My guess is they're not going to scrap Leagues Cup, or they're going to try and not scrap Leagues Cup because Open Cup is in the PLS, PSL, PLS, the professional league standards. Um, and then they'll get into a whole fight about that, and it'll be a whole nightmare. It's going to be even more of a nightmare than before. But
Probably,
the
yeah.
if there are more teams in the Open Cup, it's a step in the right direction. If we can be intelligent for like 30 seconds and find the very easy way to fix this, which is just expand the rosters, because you're doing it to yourself, everything could be okay. But what do I know?
That's a whole other that's an entirely different episode all by itself. So we should avoid going down that route.
Yeah.